Welcome, everyone, to Restructure Ripple, how talent and finance decisions shape every corner. So, why this topic? Why now? People are at the center of any single success, right? Of all of our missions, our different charter schools, different organizations out there. And right now, as we approach 7/1 in the start of a new school year, now is the perfect time to be thinking strategically about the people you have, how you structure, how you manage through change. And this interactive session brings together talent, finance, and practitioner perspectives to unpack what really happens during those mergers, downsizings, organizational redesign, and how to navigate those moments without sacrificing your financial sustainability for you and your folks. Edgility Partners, Charter Impact, and Innovation Montessori will share hard-won lessons from the field, surface the pitfalls that most schools don't see coming, and offer practical tools. That's key, right? We want you walking out of this session with actual things you can take and put into practice. We're also going to be talking about compensation structures and budget realities within your mission. So much great content to talk through today. Really excited for these panelists here and for you all to be joining us. So let's jump into it with some details on ground rules and just some housekeeping items. So please use the chat for any and all questions. We want them. We will try to address them as we go along, depending on how it fits in with the content. But we do have time at the end for Q&A. So please, please, please drop those in. We would love to answer what is most top of mind for all of you. Number two, this session is being recorded, and we will send this out after the webinar. It'll be available on YouTube, just in case you need to go back and refresh. Similar to number three, upon request, just shoot us a note after the session. Happy to provide the slides at the conclusion here. All three panelists put a lot of work into this, and you're going to find really actionable advice throughout the presentation. Last but not least, this one isn't as helpful if you can't hear me, but clear your browser cache and rejoin if you are having video or audio issues, or reach out to Brough, Brough, if you have any issues at all, and we'll get you plugged in here. So very exciting content, and I want to introduce a couple organizations just before I set the stage with the speakers. And just by way of introduction, my name is Dave Murphy. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here at Charter Impact. And what we do here at Charter Impact is we specialize in charter school back office finance and operations. So everything from your CFO, your grant management, your AP, your AR, your accounting, to payroll, to student data, really making sure that you have an incredibly optimized back office to help support those mission-driven objectives that you have. And we do that for over 150 charters nationwide, representing over 150 students, 150,000 students, and we are nationwide, currently operating in 9 states and managing over $2 billion in public funding. We also have a nonprofit arm as well, where we support those mission-driven organizations as well. We've been in business for 16 years, and at the center, you can see our core values, right? Grit, collaboration, adaptability, and of course, client centricity. These guide every single decision we make here in support of these charter schools moving forward. So thank you so much for joining us today. We'd love to chat if you're interested in continuing the discussion moving forward. I also want to pass this over to Jen to introduce Edgility.
Hey everyone, it's wonderful to see you all here today. At Edgility, we specialize in designing talent systems for mission-driven organizations in a way that allows them to empower their people, strengthen their systems, and advance their missions. We have worked with hundreds of charter schools and nonprofits across the U.S. around things such as compensation design, performance management, program design, competency framework design, succession planning, and other talent-related topics. And we work with organizations by centering our values around ensuring that we're having a tangible impact, not only at our clients, but also within the broader nonprofit and charter school sectors, ensuring that we approach the work with authentic integrity and come to the work and show up as ourselves, Um, Making sure that we are always curious about the work that we're doing, always learning, and making sure that we're getting better and empowering not only our staff, but also our clients towards excellence when it comes to managing talent. And then just the last piece is making sure we're coming to the work with joy and centering humans in the work that we do. Really working with organizations again to build talent systems that are aligned with their missions, their values, and allow them to achieve their impact. And so I'm going to hand it back to Dave.
Love it. Thank you for the intro, Jen. And right, I'm about to introduce our three panelists, and we're lucky to have all three on the line here. And I said at the beginning, this session is at the intersection of talent, finance, and practitioner perspective. That's what each one of these three folks represent here. I've got an intro that's a little bit longer, so panelists, please don't blush when I read out all the accolades here. But first up, we've got Dana Vignale, and Dana Vignale is the regional director of Charter Impact, specifically focused on the Florida and Southeast region. Dana brings over 25 years of experience across public charter and independent charter schools with leadership roles spanning principal, head of school, executive director, and CFO. She has led both academic programs and complex financial operations, including overseeing a portfolio of 8 charter schools within one of the nation's largest districts and serving a 7-school network supporting 9,000 students and 900 employees. Most recently, she led the Florida Charter Institute's supporting unit, providing statewide technical assistance and strengthening financial systems for long-term sustainability. Today, she serves as Charter Impact Senior Financial Leader in Florida, helping schools build strong operations while staying true to their mission. Next up, we have Jennifer Svedson. She is a partner at Edgility Talent Partners. She is a PhD and is a partner at Edgility, like I just said, with over 9 years of experience in consulting and human resources, specializing in compensation and talent strategy. With a background in cancer research, she brings a strong analytical and data-driven approach to designing equitable, sustainable talent programs and advising organizations on compensation, compliance, and workforce strategy. She partners closely with clients through a collaborative, empathetic approach while also mentoring internal teams and continuing thought leadership across content, conferences, and industry platforms. Prior to Edgility, Jennifer worked in nonprofit research institutions in the US and UK and served as a consultant in the life sciences and technology sectors. She holds a PhD in cell biology from Harvard University and a BA in molecular biology and biochemistry from Wesleyan University. Thanks, Jen. And last but certainly not least, we have Heather Clay from Innovation Montessori. Heather Clay is an experienced educator and leader with a strong commitment to student success. She began teaching career in 2003 after earning her bachelor in science in elementary education from Drury University and later obtained her master's in educational leadership from Eastern Kentucky University, transitioning into leadership in 2008. Throughout her career in Kentucky, she has served in multiple classroom and leadership roles, including principal and assistant superintendent before becoming executive director of Innovation Montessori. Originally from West Virginia, Heather is married to retired Colonel Douglas Clay and enjoys traveling and spending time with their 2 grown daughters. Welcome, 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 Dana, Jen, and Heather. So excited to have you speaking here. And to get the party started, we're going to start with a poll because that's going to ground us here in how we move forward. And I think our answers may tie into Heather's story a bit here. So, Kelton, if you could cue the poll, that would be wonderful. All right. So, poll number 1 here is which best describes where your school stands right now. If you could weigh in here, this will help set the stage for Heather to share her story. All right. We've got an early leader here. We're in the middle of a restructure or major budget adjustment. Well, you've come to the right place. Okay, leveling out here, we're stable, but I'm here to stay ahead of it. Love it. Okay, we've got that at 7 responses. We're in the middle of a restructure, continues to pull ahead with 10. We'll give this about just 5 more seconds here. And excellent. Some great participation in the leader in the clubhouse is we're in the middle of a restructure or major budget adjustment. That's number one. Number two is we're stable, but I'm here to stay ahead of it. Either way, you're in the right place. And with that, would love to turn it over to Heather to share your story, maybe how you've handled being in that place before.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dave. So yes, you came to the right place because when I stepped into this role 3 years ago, I would say we were in the middle of a major restructure. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our school first, and then go into what we have endured over the last 3 years. When a little bit about Innovation Montessori, we actually started in 2011 by a group of parents. They opened up the Montessori of Winter Garden Charter School in a strip mall. They wanted an elementary education for their children who were just doing 3 and 4 year old Montessori school. But at that time, Orange County didn't have any public Montessori schools. They started to grow. They were a little over 200 students in this strip mall, and they realized quickly we've got to open up an actual campus. So in 2018, they opened up their first campus, which was on 18 acres. They created a primary building, which, if you know anything about Montessori, we do everything in age groups. So 3 through 5 year old students, so that would be 3, 4 in kindergarten, they had a primary building for them. And then they opened up an elementary campus for grades 1 through 8 at that time. They started with 238 students and they wanted to continue to grow. And it was a big thing to have a public Montessori school. Most of the time, it's always private. Of course, COVID happens during that time and that changes a lot of things, but they continued to try to grow their enrollment. And then they also started servicing 9th through 12th grade students, which a secondary Montessori school is almost unheard of. There's very few in the United States. So that was also a new path to get to navigate. They wanted to build on that 18-acre campus, but quickly realized after COVID that the prices were just too high. So they obtained a building offsite on another campus. And at that time, they opened in 2022. They had 17 seniors graduating, and they were ready to roll. They opened a charter called Innovation Montessori High School. We currently have over 1,000 students in ages 3 through 12th grade, and we're actually one of the largest fully accredited public Montessori schools in the United States. So I'm very proud of where they came from, but some of that growth and some of the changes is what led to when I stepped in 2023. So when I stepped in 2023, the previous executive director decided to retire, but she had kind of been there since the beginning of the school, maybe a couple years right, after it started. And then the finance director as well. So they kind of started together, they formed their systems together, and then the growth happened, which they had a lot of great qualities, but it also caused a lot of systems not to be put in place. The year prior to me coming in 2023, in 2022, when they opened the new high school, they also acquired a bond. And that bond, of course, all bonds come with covenants, and it had one of them was 30 days cash on hand. And then a lot of other things that came with that. They also merged the charter. So we no longer have Innovation Montessori High School. We are now one charter, which is Innovation Montessori Ocoee. When I came in, I quickly realized that things weren't going as smoothly as I had hoped. I got a phone call from the bond investors who were upset at that time, not realizing that the executive director was retiring. Also, on top of that, the finance director decided that they wanted to leave as well. So the executive director left at the end of June. My finance director left mid-January, or I'm sorry, mid-July. That meant that I had nobody that really knew the systems because that finance director did all of operations and all of finance and all of HR. So he held all of that knowledge that we really needed, and there were no systems put in place. His words to me were, I hope you make it till October, but probably winter break and it's over. We at that time did not meet our bond covenant of the 30 days on hand. And actually, as I started digging into, we got down to 8 days cash on hand. So I had no idea how we were going to make payroll when that. On top of all of that, I'm coming from a different state, so I didn't know all of the regulations for Florida, and I was new to charter schools. And so I had always worked in a district where you had all of those people to kind of help you out. So it was definitely a learning experience. As I started to pull back the curtain, there were no systems. We had no credit card. They used a debit card for everything, no purchase orders, all of those things that I knew prior knowledge that we needed to have in place. We overspent ESSER. The people who were hired with ESSER didn't realize that they were ESSER funded. And so we really had to take a deep look. And that's when I was introduced to Dana. So that was in September of 2023. And Dana and my team really got together and started trying to peel back all of the layers and figure out what's our next steps. I think the big thing that really we had to look at too was it wasn't just about numbers, there were employees that was standing behind those numbers, and we had to make some tough decisions. So I know Jen's also going to be able to talk about some of those things. So I don't want to pretend like it's all bad now, and we'll share at the end where we are currently. But if you are in the middle of restructuring, I understand where you're at. It's scary and it's difficult, but with the right resources, you'll come out on the other end. So, Dave, I'll turn it back over to you, and then I'll meet with you at the end.
Excellent. Thanks so much for sharing the story there, Heather. And folks, you've heard about it. You just heard from Heather about the challenges that she stepped into. If that resonates or you have any questions for your current context, please drop them in the chat. We will try to weave in the answers as we go along, as Jen and Dana present. Poll number 2 here, just to again set the stage for Dana, is how would you describe your school's current budget situation? We're heavily reliant on grants and worried about what happens when they end. We're feeling general fund pressure, but don't have a clear model to address it. We're making staffing decisions based on hope, not hard numbers. And then last is we have a solid multi-year model, but I want to pressure test it. Okay. All right. Leader so far is we're feeling general fund pressure, but don't have a clear model to address it. So many folks in that position right now, and currently that's represented here by our attendees with 58% of that. Second is we have solid multi-year model, but want to pressure test it. So great. All right, let's stop that poll, and I think that is a perfect segue, Dana, as we look at that, the answers there to share some financial best practices. So over to the finance and staffing strategy with Dana.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dave. And Heather, it's always great to see you and work with you. Yeah, a lot of our experience together informed a lot of my work. And so I want to start by acknowledging what's most important. Restructuring decisions are probably the hardest decisions school leaders ever have to make. On one hand, we're called to lead with empathy and heart. We know every major decision that we make has a lasting impact on our people, whether it's staff, families, students, or even the community at large. The weight is real, and it should be. On the other hand, we're also running a business. We're responsible for the long-term stability and sustainability of our organization, not just this year, but 5, 10, and 20 years from now. The hard truth is simple. If we consistently spend more than what we generate, we will eventually run out of money and close. And a closed school helps no one. Research bears this out. The majority of charter schools that close do so because of financial problems. This is not a hypothetical risk. It's the most common reason schools like ours cease to exist. So this balance between leading with heart and running a sound organization is not an easy one, and there's no clear answer. But navigating it thoughtfully is exactly what responsible leadership looks like. So I will stay focused on the why we have to make some of these hard decisions, and then I'm really excited to pass it off to Jen and Edgility Partners to talk more about how to make that happen in a way that has a lot of heart and soul at the heart of it. So when you look at a charter school budget, 2 line items dominate everything else: facilities and staffing. Facilities costs are largely fixed. Whether you fill your building to its 600-seat capacity or you come in at 70% of your enrollment, your lease, your utilities, your building costs, for the most part, stay the same. The building doesn't get cheaper just because fewer kids show up. Staffing is different. Staffing is variable. So when enrollment misses projections, when funding is unstable, or when you have unanticipated costs, staff is where leaders have to look hard to bring the budget back into balance. And that is not a reflection of how we value our people. It's a reflection of where the flexibility in the budget actually lives. So Heather's situation is not uncommon. I've worked with many schools facing remarkably similar challenges. As she mentioned, we started to work in September 2023. I think she was a few months into her job. I remember the day clearly, sitting in her office, and she shares with me something that stops me cold in my tracks and says, I have 8 days cash on hand, and I'm going to run out of money by December. Now, you walk into her school, it doesn't look like it's financially struggling, phenomenal program, great resources. This hard reality was something I never would have known. And as Heather mentioned, she didn't create the situation, she inherited it. And I have enormous respect for what she did next. She rolled up her sleeves and went line by line on that budget, looking for every possible area of savings before ever considering staffing, which is exactly what a great leader will do. She reviewed every vendor contract, she renegotiated terms, and she found about 130,000 in savings. That was just money playing out in plain sight. But unfortunately, that was not enough. So we had to start looking at staffing. There are 2 red flags that resurfaced immediately, and this is a common theme when I'm working with schools in a financial recovery. A number of legacy positions that no longer reflected current school needs, and then the absence of a consistent defensible salary scale. So I'll talk about 2 of these red flags. One is a legacy position. These are roles that made sense when they were created, often during a period of growth, strong enrollment, or specific grant funding. But then the organization continued to carry these forward, even if the circumstances change. So they tend to fall into a few categories. One is built around a person, not a need. We all know we love the flexibility of charter schools. You've got a rock star person. You create a role that specifically, plays upon all of their strengths. But what happens after that person leaves? Does that role diminish, or is that passed off to someone else? You also might have grant funded positions, and those also get absorbed into the general operations when the grant funds sunset. You might have roles that were duplicated functions. They may have made sense when you were at a larger school size, but if you have diminishing enrollment, you have to look at whether or not having those 2 roles makes sense. And that also leads to seeing that your staffing ratios and your enrollment makes sense. If your enrollment starts to dwindle, you need to look hard at also right-sizing those staffing ratios. And then also looking at specialized roles without sufficient demand. It might be designed around a program. Do you still have that program? Is it still in high demand? If that initiative has shrunk, changed, or ended, you might want to rethink those particular roles. The second area that was a red flag in Heather's schools, and again, I see consistently in many schools, is the lack of a defined salary scale. Compensation decisions get made one at a time over many years by many different people. A new hire might negotiate a higher rate, or a longtime employee gets a bump. Someone else quietly receives an increase that never gets documented properly. So multiply that by a staff of 30 to 40 over a decade, and you end up with a payroll that not everyone understands, and that is not sustainable. And 2 people might be doing the same job with very different salaries, and no one can really explain why. In Heather's case, that's exactly what we found. There was no scale to hold compensation against, no framework for evaluating whether that pay was reasonable. We didn't even know if it was fair, and none of it was sustainable. So we really had to untangle this, and having those individual conversations with staff was probably one of the hardest conversations Heather had to have during this restructuring process. So a consistent salary scale is not just a financial tool, but it creates fairness, it creates transparency, and when difficult decisions have to be made, it gives you a principled, defensible basis for every conversation. So now we'll kind of walk you through what we did next and what we were really thinking about. And so much of this, again, has informed the work I do as I work with schools, looking at the complexity of staffing scales. Um, the most important thing is to really look at your needs versus your wants. Of course, every school wants ample staffing to meet the myriads of demands of running a school. We know school leaders wear many, many hats, and people have to be very flexible. But at some point, you have to take a disciplined look at what is needed and what is wanted. One starting point is benchmarking, right? So looking at your staffing levels in comparison to other schools or even your school district. The easiest place to start really is at your school district. They typically operate very lean, of course, compliant. Now, it doesn't mean you should mirror their exact model, but it does at least give you a strong reality-based baseline. Now, if a school district school can operate with one assistant principal for up to 900 students. If you have a school of 500 students and you have 2 or 3 APs, does that make sense, right? So it's at least a place to get started to benchmark. Next, compare against peer or other high-performing schools. Tap into your network of charter school principals in your area. Many are very open about sharing some of their best practices, their ideas, but the more information you share, the better. This also is where a back office provider or a payroll provider might be able to also provide you with some benchmarking data so that you can have comparative insights. Most importantly, ask which positions have the greatest impact on student learning. Every single role should tie back directly or indirectly to student outcomes. Of course, we all want to have a fundraising director, but you have to ask yourself, funding that position, is that more important than, say, an instructional coach? Which one will have the greatest impact? Um, and then we all know parents and teachers value small class sizes, but you really have to ask the hard question, is this financially sustainable? And finally, avoid basing your staffing on optimism. Do not add positions because you hope your enrollment will increase in fall. Staff based on what you know, not on what you hope. So that leads me to staffing and compensating conservatively. I cannot stress enough, base your staffing on the enrollment and funding you know you have, not what you hope or project. This is a common and very costly mistake, and one I see schools make very often. They base it on their enrollment goal. So let's say your enrollment goal is 1,000 students, but you currently have 825 students in your school. Unless you're adding a grade level or there's some other circumstances, it's not that likely you're going to get to that 1,000. Keep that 1,000 as your goal, but do not staff on 1,000. Base your staffing on what you know you'll have. The logic feels sound in the moment, right? You're optimistic, your team has worked really hard with recruitment, and you really want the right place, the right team in place on day one. And I understand that instinct completely as a former principal. But when the enrollment numbers don't materialize, and sometimes they don't, you find yourself overstaffed, over budget, and facing decisions that could have been avoided. And it's always easier to add position as enrollment grows than to eliminate positions because you've overhired. Here in Florida, this has a very painful dimension. Our funding is tied to an October survey count. So if we say staffed our school at 1,000, but our enrollment count in October only comes in at 825, we really have to make those hard decisions. And usually those decisions are being made right before the holidays. Again, it's always easier to add than take away positions. So I get it. We want the strongest team possible as early as possible, but over-committing on the front doesn't set your team up for success. It creates conditions for harm and compromised morale down the road. So hire for who you have and build from there. So we've mentioned briefly also about grant-funded position. Specifically, we saw this a lot with ESSER. It is so smart to use your federal funds or your grant funds strategically, especially to offset the general fund. Equally important, make sure you're pursuing every grant made available to you. I worked with a school where, based on the home schools of the enrolled students, I knew that they would qualify for Title I funding. But in the 20 years of operations, the school never applied for or made sure that their students applied for the free reduced lunch or completed the income surveys. As a result, they were leaving almost 250,000 a year on the table annually. And even more striking, they were offering these supplemental positions to support the students, yet all of that had to be offset with the general fund rather than being covered by, say, a Title I fund. So aside from making sure you're going after every single grant you possibly can, ensure that you have a clear, proactive process for capturing eligibility and maximizing that grant revenue. But second, have a strong understanding of how you can use those categorical funds. They're highly restricted, but again, they can definitely add some supplemental positions that you're going to want to offer in your school. But you've got to be strategic about that. And lastly, be very cautious about funding positions with fundraising proceeds. Oftentimes, school will say, we're fundraising to get a brand new counselor, or we're fundraising for more paraprofessionals in the class. But you have to ask, if we cannot fundraise for those positions, if we do not hit that fundraising goal, how will those positions be paid for? Again, will that be absorbed in the general fund, or are we again hiring on hope rather than what's sustainability? If you are hiring grant-funded positions, that's great, but make sure that you are crystal clear about those grant-funded positions and have a plan for it. So a few safeguards to discuss. First, ensure transparency for both you and the employee. Make sure that that employee knows that that position is grant funded, whether it's on the job description or whether it's on the employment contract. Make sure that it's clearly stated. And then ask yourself, before bringing in that grant funded role, what happens if the funding sunsets? Is the position going to be eliminated, or is it going to be absorbed into the general fund? And third, avoid the drift, right? What I mean by that is when these grant funded positions become de facto permanent positions without a deliberate financial decision. I saw this happen in many schools with ESSER, and as a result, they found themselves in a structural deficit by maintaining grant funded positions. And last but not least, make sure you're tracking this annually. Every grant funded role should be revisited annually and make sure that A, it aligns with the funding that's available, and is this long-term sustainability. And that leads me to my last important point. Make sure you're looking at multi-year budgeting and the fiscal impact of staffing. So whether it's a grant funded position or a general funded position, you've got to see the long-term results of just bringing in that position. Oftentimes, the principal will say, oh, I'm going to hire a new, I don't know, academic advisor, and they'll just hire that person. It's only going to cost me $55,000. Well, in reality, that position is actually going to have a much greater fiscal impact. You have to add FICA at 7.65%. You've got to add unemployment and workers' comp about 1%. Are you offering retirement? Might be 3% or an additional 5%. Or if you're doing the Florida retirement system, like 18%. Looking at that base cost of 55,000 and then adding in all the fringe, 12% of additional costs, that's another $6,600 a year. You've got to commit to that position. And that's not even talking about the healthcare costs if that person is full-time and going to have full benefits. That's looking anywhere upwards of $10,000 to $12,000 additional lately. So if you bring that position for this year, what will that look like in year 2 or year 3? And that's where modeling your budget forecast over 3 years is a wise thing to do, and really understanding the impact over the long term of bringing in those different positions. And lastly, use enrollment-based scenarios, right? So what will my staffing look like if I hit 100%, or if I'm shy of that, do a staffing plan for 90%, and hopefully you'll be at 110%, and you can look at the staffing plan for that as well. But again, being very, very strategic with every single hire is going to help you create that sustainable model. So again, I am focusing on the why we have to look at this so closely. Again, Heather did phenomenal work. And so we have those 5 principles of how we kind of work through a lot of this, getting her back on track. And these are a lot of the recommendations that I make for the schools that I work with. So now that I've presented the why, I'm going to pass it off to the awesome team at Edgility to talk about how you can do this in a way that's not going to rock the heart and soul of your school.
Great point, Dana. right? You just outlined the finance side. Time to hear more about the talent side. And as we step into Jen's section here, we're going to jump to our third and final poll to help set the stage and guide Jennifer's comments here. So, poll number 3, what is your biggest staffing challenge heading into next year? Figuring out who to keep, restructure, or let go. Off to an early lead here. Compensation, staying competitive without breaking the budget. Option 3 is retaining key people through uncertainty. And the last option is we don't have a clear process for any of this. Okay, compensation, top answer right now. Figuring out who to keep, restructure, and let go. Very tough situation and topic there, but I know Jennifer is going to be walking through some of those items as well. All right, some great responses here, and the winner is compensation, staying competitive without breaking the budget, followed closely by figuring out who to keep, restructure, or let go. So, Jennifer, would love to turn it over to you to hear more about the talent side.
Excellent. Oh, we've gone a little too far. Let me go backwards there. Hey, everyone. I'm excited to just talk to you all about talent and what you want to be considering from a talent perspective as you go through a restructure. I'm going to start by talking about staffing models. I'll talk about staff engagement, and I'll finish up with compensation. From a staffing model perspective, you want to make sure that you are strategic about your adjustments. And really that I've outlined here what is really a 6-step process. The first step is really about aligning your staffing model with your school or organizational goals. You want to make sure that you're considering your business strategy, your departmental objectives, financial goals, and operational outcomes. One thing that Heather raised was really critical to them and their identity. The identity of their school was that they were a Montessori school and they offered a free public Montessori education. And to do that, they needed to make sure that they were keeping their staffing ratios in line with what's required by the Montessori model. And so for them, one important goal was to make sure that they continue to be a Montessori organization, and staffing staffing was part of that consideration of how do we achieve that goal. So once they kind of know what the goal is, right, maintain Montessori compliance, the next step is then analyze your current workforce to understand where you have strengths, where you have bottlenecks, and then where you have potential risk areas. So where are you potentially overstaffed or understaffed? And Dana, you talked about kind of thinking about staffing and thinking about those needs and those wants, right? So what do you need in your current workforce and what is the want in your current workforce? So you want to look at your current workforce, not only look at headcount, but make sure you have the skills, you have folks, the skills, you have the structure, you have performance in place, productivity, retention and turnover, or look at kind of all of those statistics across talent to understand where is that workforce, where are the strengths in your workforce, and again, where are those bottlenecks. And so for Heather, she had to make sure that she had the right number of teachers and aides per classroom to be meeting that compliance with the Montessori model. Once you've looked at your current workforce or analyzed it, you want to make sure you're considering external factors. So you want to make sure you're thinking about supply and demand. We know in many parts of the country, teachers are in short supply and high demand. You want to make sure you're looking at what your competitors are doing in terms of their compensation and also their talent strategies. So how are they engaging staff and retaining staff? And you want to make sure you're, as Dana talked about, considering your funding and where the funding landscape currently is. If, 2 years ago we went through an ESSER roll-off, right? you want to be keeping that in mind if you see grants are going to be ending or expect that there's going to be changes in your access to funds, that you're assessing that and aware of that before you start to forecast your future workforce demand. And start to think about who do I need, who do we need to keep, who do we need to let go. And so fourth step is really around making sure that you're forecasting, or is to forecast your future demand. You'll want to make sure you understand your historical and current context around performance. Student enrollment was critical, it isn't critical, and Dana brought that up in her conversation. And how your school or organization is changing so that you can make sure that you have the right people in the right seats, right? You're hitting all of those needs by having the right people in the right seats, eliminating those legacy roles where you no longer may need those staff, and being very conservative with your kind of financial outlook to make sure that, again, you have the right people in the right seats that can stay financially sustainable. Once you forecast your future workforce, you can then develop or update your talent strategy. Really, that talent strategy allows you to ensure that you can close skill gaps efficiently and maintain a long-term workforce readiness. You want to make sure you're focusing on attraction, retention, development of your staff, as well as where you can potentially outsource roles to fill gaps in a way that's flexible, and financially friendly. Once you have your talent strategy, you can then implement and iterate. And it's important to remember that a staffing model is not a one-time project. It should evolve with your school and your workforce. And so Heather didn't talk about this yet, but I'm hoping she'll talk about it later. After they had gone through this first round, they got to a year. At a year, things were much stabler. And at that time, she realized they needed a director of Montessori education for the school. And so that's where that iterate comes in, right? You've gotten through a time period, 6 months, a year, whatever that time period looks like. Then it's important to make sure that you're going back, reviewing your staffing model, identifying where your current workforce is, identifying where your school is a year later, and then if you need to make those strategic hires, making those strategic hires to drive your impact forward. Next, I'm going to talk about, and I went a little too far there again. Let's go backwards one. Next, I'm going to talk about potential pitfalls and really talk about staff engagement. So how do we ensure that we are keeping staff engaged through a major change, right? Through a major, whether that be a merger, acquisition, or reduction in force, or some other type of restructure. How do we keep our staff engaged? How do we retain them through that? And there are a list of common pitfalls here. Really, it also talks about what typically happens and then what to do instead. Really critical that first you explain what's happening in simple language, share what's been decided and not decided, and then give a clear timeline for updates. So being transparent with staff and being genuine about it, right? It's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows, right? We don't want to come in there and pretend like, status quo is what's going to be happening over the next 6 months or a year. It's probably at times going to be hard, and you want to make sure that you're bringing that genuineness to your communications with staff and managers. You want to make sure that managers are trained before information is communicated out to staff. So managers know what's happening, and they have tools such as FAQs or trainings and talking points that will allow them to answer questions when their staff come to them. You want to make sure that you treat people like humans and that you deliver hard news in person when possible, acknowledge emotions, and then make sure that you're there for that person and offer transition support for anyone that may either be leaving the organization or potentially looking, thinking about transferring into a different role within the organization, as well as for staff that may be staying, right? Just make sure that you're coming to them and treating them as human, and being there for them in moments that can be very difficult to navigate. You want to make sure that you communicate quickly and clarify. So you want to make sure once you share that there's going to be a change or a restructure, that you move quickly to clarify individual impacts and timelines. You don't want staff to be sitting around for a month or two wondering if their job's going to get cut, or their best friend's job, or their managers, right? You want them to know as quickly as possible how they are going to be affected, so that they can figure out their next steps. You want to make sure, and I see this all the time in schools, where folks leave and workload is distributed to the remainers. Here it's called survivors. And what happens is those survivors burn out because they've now taken on the work of all the staff who have left. And so it's critical when staff leave that you look at, from that needs and wants perspective again, what needs to get done, what do we have to prioritize, what would be a nice to have, what are our wants in terms of the work that needs to get done, and then what can we drop all together and start with those needs and distribute those needs across staff. And then if there's space, you can think about wants, how you're going to distribute wants. But you want to make sure that you don't, again, burn out your folks and then have the folks you want to keep leave, right? And then last one is just to make sure that you're really listening to folks, not just hearing them in one ear out the other, but that you're listening and understanding what's coming up for them. And you can do that through listening sessions, surveys, Q&A, or just oftentimes there's water cooler talk, right? You'll hear water cooler talk or themes that are coming up, and that you can address those themes as they come up with all staff. In terms of transitioning staff, you want to transition staff with dignity and care, and I put here, keep it human. Make sure you communicate clearly with them and share those decisions in private. Give them real choices. So offer options where it's possible for, say, other roles or timing or potential next steps. But make sure they're real, right? Don't tell them they can stay for 6 weeks when the timeline is 2 weeks, right? We want to make sure that they're real choices, not pretend choices. You want to make sure that you provide transition support. So if you can, hook them up with people in your network, give a reference, give them resources that will help them not only transition out of your organization, but put them on a path to finding their next role. You want to honor their commitment to your school. Make sure you acknowledge the impact that they've had on your organization, and what it has meant for your organization, and give them enough time to process what's coming, process everything they've heard from you and to prepare for their exit. And then just stay available after you share the news. You want to make sure that they know they can come to you if they have any questions, whether it be about offboarding or finding their next role, or even, someone in the organization who could maybe review their resume and help them get that polished up so they can start applying for next roles. Make sure they know that you are there for them throughout their transition. I know we're getting short on time. We'll move quickly through the next couple of slides, but really I'm going to touch on compensation. At Edgility, when we're working with clients, we take a balanced approach to compensation. And really what we're thinking about is what is the right balance for your organization of internal equity, external competitiveness, compliance, and organization fiscal responsibility and sustainability. As we heard from Heather, when she started the situation, the school was not in a good financial position, right? They had 8 days of cash on hand, and that's that financial sustainability piece, right? And they had to make sure that any changes were in compliance, not only with state requirements and federal requirements, but also with Montessori requirements. They needed to understand what competitive looked like, right? What did it mean to be competitive? By developing a salary structure, and Dana talked about the importance of having that structure. And then they had to address internal equity concerns where staff at the same level of experience had, through one method or another, been able to negotiate significantly different pay. And so ultimately, they needed to figure out how to balance these four factors for them. And as Dana shared, one of the linchpins of doing that was developing that salary structure and having something that gave them a structure to implement compensation within the organization in a manner that was consistent and equitable and financially sustainable, and ensured that they remained in compliance. Last slide is about kind of key considerations relating to compensation when you're preparing for a restructure. You want to think about your compensation structure. What needs to be adjusted in your structure? Do you need to add or remove levels? Do you need to add job families? Do you need to shift your target in the market because maybe you were previously targeting the 60th percentile and it's just not sustainable anymore? You want to think about additional responsibilities. So folks that are staying and taking on additional work, how are you going to recognize them? What does that policy look like? What do potential promotions look like for those folks? You want to be mindful of your mission critical roles and recognize those roles, and potentially can offer bonuses, stipends, or promotions. As Heather shared, they hired the director of Montessori after she had come in, and if that person had been in place, and when she had joined, that might have been a mission critical role that she wanted to make sure that she kept that person in place, right? And was offering them what they needed to stay. And then the last one is really around transitions, making sure that when folks are transitioning, you're thinking about what does their compensation look like as they go through that transition. Will you offer severance pay? How much and how long? Who's eligible? And then, of course, don't forget about benefits. Will they be able to keep their benefits and for how long? And so with that, I think I'm handing it back to Heather to wrap us up.
Yeah, full circle moment here. And we started with Heather. We're going to close with Heather, see where things came to fruition here.
Absolutely. Thank you. I want to really go back and look at what Dana and Jen said. A lot of those things, I'm finishing up my third year here that we had to put in place. And I wish I could say, oh, that we haven't had any bumps since we done all of those things. But we all know I've been in education for 23 years. Education, it's always bumpy. It's always changing. The pendulum always goes back and forth. So we have had to continue to ensure and rely on our systems that we put into place. As you'll see, we're close to 100 days cash on hand now, and we're meeting our debt service ratio. We know all of our vendors, all of our obligations to those vendors. We have a process. If somebody wants to purchase something or sign a contract, we have a process in place that has to go through before we'll even consider it. We fully have implemented our finance and HR infrastructure and systems. I'll be transparent. My finance manager left in January. And we are still fully operational. And that's because I've done a lot of cross training with my staff. So my HR director was able to step in and fulfill those duties, and work through that process. And so we haven't really missed a beat. Like, we're just going to keep going. And we've kind of expanded that to the whole organization and putting systems in place. My staff, my entire staff, especially my administrators, know our processes. And I think that is the key. That's one of the things I learned early on as administrator. You can have the best laid plans, but if your staff who are in charge of implementing those plans don't understand them and you're not constantly revisiting them, you're not going to go anywhere. You're the only person that's running the whole organization. And we know, as Jen talked, you're going to have burnout and that stress of all of those people, that just a few people doing everything. In addition to our monthly finance meetings, we do a pre-finance meeting. I do that with my board treasurer. And then we also work closely with my administrators. My administrators help build our budget each year. So they understand it and they know That's one of the things that Dana and I did in the very beginning, where we put in all of the things that we have to purchase up front, all of the utilities, all the bond payments, and then I get into I call it the war room, and they fight it out of who needs what, because this is the only money we have left. And there's things that come in like each year. Enrollment is always a big factor, or something that I find, honest, full transparency, we've gotten bills that weren't paid back in 2015 that I just, inherited, that we still are getting. So it definitely is utilizing all the tools that Dana and Jen said, and continually to be transparent with your staff, and ensuring systems are in place. That's where we are today. And hopefully, with all of the other educational changes, we'll continue to show growth and continue to grow, as our initials are IMO, that we continue to do what's best for kids. So thank you all so much.
Yeah, love it, Heather. What a great story, and congratulations on the turnaround and all the success. Everything that you've learned, and sharing some words of wisdom here. I don't see any questions in the chat, but I've got plenty of my own. So if you do have one, please drop it in the chat. But while we're waiting for that, I think a few folks have brought this up right now, which is ignoring the workload and burnout for survivors, quote unquote, right? And one of the pieces of guidance is reassessing priorities. Heather, I'd love to hear from you. Like, how have you reassessed folks' priorities so that it's not just a dump of additional workload on the folks left?
So I think the first thing is we really had to sit down and see what is it everybody's actually doing. You do have job descriptions, and that sounds great, but it always says other duties as assigned. And so we really had to look at our structure and say, what is it that everybody's doing and what needs to be done? And we're actually going through that now. I've had some turnover, and so I have a meeting scheduled in the next week or so with my admin to say, how can we restructure that one person isn't filling it all? My operations and IT person, had to leave. And so right now, people are taking on additional duties. And so I think the biggest thing is always revisiting that, because education changes, requirements change. We talked about grants. We may have somebody responsible for grants, but then they change of how we document that, and that becomes a bigger task. And so I think that would be my biggest piece of advice, is really sit down and have people to list out even the small things that you don't even think about, you just naturally do, is to list those out, and then talk about how can we streamline? Do we not have a system in place? What process do we need to put into place? Or is it that we do have to look at our structure and hire somebody else to help with those tasks? And so that would be my advice, is just don't take it for granted, because your people will leave over time. And we all know compensation is, we back up to Orange County District, which is huge, and they pay really well. And so we're always having to compete with that. So I don't want to burn my people out where they're not happy coming to work each day.
Love it. So assess the current state. That's the first step here, Heather. All right, final words from each of our panelists here. Quick question. This wasn't a plant, but poll three. The winning answer was compensation, staying competitive without breaking the budget. For Dana, Jennifer, and Heather, what is one piece of advice in a sentence or less on how to navigate raises?
I would say you have to look at, would you rather have many people at a fair compensation, or fewer people, like those true rock stars, more higher compensation, right? The bucket of money is finite, right? So you really kind of have to balance, would I rather have fewer rock stars at a high salary where I could keep them, retain them, make them happy, or many others at a very average salary?
And if I were to jump in on that, what Dana's talking towards is your talent strategy. Who do you want to attract and retain, right? And if you want to attract and retain rock stars, that's going to look different in terms of your competitiveness in the market versus growing and developing your own people. And so that feels really critical. And then based on that strategy, you can figure out where your compensation should be in the market.
I agree with Dana and Jen, what they said. The other piece I would say to that is, you also can be selective of your vendors. And so make them compete against each other because they are also wanting your business. And so don't just settle like, hey, this is the same company we've always used, the same electrician, the same, all of those things that you don't think add up, custodial supplies, all of that. Really be in there and making them compete for your business because they want that as well. And so don't just get, well, that's my buddy and that's who I've always been. We
Mm.
saw a lot of cost savings. So then you can turn that money around and actually put it towards your people who are your most important asset.
Love it.
Mm.
What a way to take us home there, Heather. And Heather, Jennifer, Dana, thank you so much for sharing all of the insight here into all of our attendees. Really appreciate you tuning in. Hopefully, you felt that this was helpful, insightful. Please feel free to follow us all on LinkedIn, all of our different organizations. You can see a QR code there from Edgility as well for their diagnostic survey if you want to put some of these elements into practice. And again, thank you all, panelists, attendees alike. Have an awesome rest of the day.